ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula says the government has not received confirmation that Russian President Vladimir Putin will be attending the Brics summit in Johannesburg next month. Meanwhile, Deputy President Paul Mashatile says government is still trying to persuade Putin not to come. This comes as the Brics political parties dialogue kicks off today. Let's try to distill all of this for you. Bring in international relations expert Brooks Spector, who joins us now via our video link in Johannesburg, I understand. Great to have you on the program as always, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. There's still so many different moving parts around Brics, but as a start, help us place the significance of this political parties dialogue. What do you understand to be the objective here?
Well, I mean, let's put it into an even larger context. What's the ultimate purpose of the leaders' meeting, which is due to happen in August? Because decisions on international relations ultimately derive from government action rather than individual political parties. And as your earlier commentary points to, there's a significant set of uncertainties around the attendance and participation of Russia's Vladimir Putin in the meeting that's due to come up in next month's time. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the different issues that are impinging on his decision or on South Africa's decision to include him. But I think they're both domestic and international ones. Domestic in Russia, domestic in South Africa, and the international issue, which of course there are two: the ongoing war in Ukraine, and then the International Criminal Court's indictment, which still stands, the warrant of arrest, which, regardless of what might be said by parties or governments, remains in effect. So, there's a fair amount of uncertainty on this particular table.
Absolutely. And, even just as recently as yesterday, we heard of, Russia pulling out of that Ukraine deal on grain, which there's concerns may affect global supplies. But we'll speak about all of that in just a moment. I'm just hoping to, as a start, place the significance of this three-day meeting of political parties, led in some parts by the ANC. How much influence do you see this gathering having on the summit itself, even on these questions around whether or not Vladimir Putin should arrive in South Africa?
Well, I mean, we can take it as a given that the political part, the ANC in South Africa and the government in South Africa are not going to be reaching starkly different ideas and positions. I mean, the one is, after all, subservient to the other, and the governing parties of the individual countries concerned are all presumably fairly comfortably ensconced in their positions as leaders of the government. So I'm not sure it's really crucial to find a distinction between party and government in this case. The one will follow what the other one says, or in fact, the one will be what the other one says. And so I think we shouldn't try to split hairs on whether party and government are facing different directions in South Africa as well as in India, Brazil, Russia, China, because of the way in which the countries are governed.
Sure. I suppose that will raise questions around what the point is, right? I mean, why have this gathering, which is in some ways presented as this melting pot of different ideas where there'll be a contestation of different views, when we kind of know what is likely to be the outcome of the dialogue itself. There's likely to be an echo of whatever government has said already.
Yeah, that's basically my point. And even, for example, this upcoming youth summit, it's not going to range starkly differently in positions and circumstances and in presentations from the governments of the countries concerned. I mean, some of it is, a lot of this is done for ceremonial purposes. We used to call this kind of thing waving the flag, but it's effectively non-substantive politics, performance politics, if you will.
Sure. Some people who are part of the commentariat have presented interesting takes on whether or not Vladimir Putin should be here. But there's others who look even further back around whether it was fair for the International Criminal Court to in some ways put South Africa in this position by issuing this warrant of arrest against Putin, knowing very well that Putin is set to arrive in South Africa for the summit. Is that a sound critique, you reckon?
No, I don't. I mean, it wasn't done, after all, with South Africa in mind. It was done because, remember, the purposes of this warrant of arrest, it really doesn't speak to South Africa at all. It speaks to the fate of perhaps 16,000 children that have been forcibly removed from areas under military control by Russia from Ukraine. Children ranging from infants to teenagers who have been violently removed from homes and orphanages and shelters. And the warrant of arrest is not a broad statement of policy about the invasion per se, but limited in particular to the treatment of non-combatant children. And in fact, if you remember, the original warrant of arrest was for Vladimir Putin and the Russian Commission of Children's Welfare. And so the terms of the warrant speak directly to those actions. And I don't think the question of whether or not Vladimir Putin would or wouldn't travel to South Africa was really much of a question for the criminal court to weigh in on, because the two matters do not necessarily intersect. South Africa, on the other hand, has put itself in the position of having that intersection by insisting that there would be a meeting of principals in person rather than video links or representatives at a lower level, or some mix of that. And the fact that the date was set essentially by the parties rather than some sort of immutable law of nature. The fact that South Africa's government, I don't mean to speak on behalf of the whole country, South Africa's government has found itself in a difficulty over whether or not Vladimir Putin, A, should be invited and B, should attend, is testament to the fact that the warrant of arrest is important and is one that is subject to a fair amount of debate and discussion within the country as well as internationally.
Yeah, we now know the Deputy President of the country and indeed the party, the ANC, that's Paul Mashatile, has said that there are attempts to try to convince Vladimir Putin not to actually arrive in the country. It may sort what I call the Putin question out in the short term, but of course it's going to have some kind of bearing on how the country is viewed by the international community, in a context, by the way, where several leaders in the governing party and in government have already intimated at the idea of South Africa actually reconsidering its membership of the ICC. How do you see that all landing, globally at least, not just insofar as domestic affairs are concerned?
Well, let's take these things one at a time. Reconsidering one's adherence to the Statute of Rome would be a serious bit of business, and it's one that wouldn't happen instantaneously in any case. There are notice periods, and it would require debate in Parliament, and it would be a subject of major discussion nationally. The larger problem is that although the South African government has managed to convince itself that it is neutral in the current hostilities, or non-aligned as sometimes is said, by its actions and its deeds, most people abroad tend to see it as anything but non-aligned or neutral in this regard. I'm going to make one suggestion for the South African government, although obviously I don't have any say in the matter or any real influence on it. And it would be a recommendation that doesn't cost South Africa, but in fact may earn it some international credit, if it were to forcibly and vociferously criticize the Russian decision to withdraw from the agreement that had been negotiated via the Turkish government and the UN to allow peaceable passage of grain exports from Ukraine. I say that because it primarily hurts the poorest nations of the world, and many of those are in Africa. And by denouncing such a move on the part of the Russians, the government might well be able to earn some international credibility and credit.
Gotcha.
Where at this point there's been some criticism.
Sure. All right. Loud and clear. Insightful as always. Brooks Spector, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it on the AM.